Tim Sauer for Winnie TV at SMTAI in Chicago, and I'm joined today for a panel about the EMS landscape by Gayle. Now, Gayle is a very experienced in EMS as well as marketing within the electronics industry. Now, you work for a number of large EMS companies, so you know the landscape very well, and you're still working on a consultative basis for some big global players as well. And then we've got Craig, who also has an important background in the electronics manufacturing industry, and works with all tiers of manufacturers throughout, from tier ones right down to the smaller mum and pop shops, and consults on the level of their processes. So it's a great panel to have to discuss the current EMS landscape, really. And I think what we're hearing is with developments or trends like Industry 4.0 going on, machine-to-machine communication, near sourcing, far sourcing, etc., there seems to be, and I'm hoping that you'll agree or disagree with this, there seems to be a shift in the way EMS companies need to work. Can you give me a little bit of an introduction as to where we're at the moment in the EMS landscape?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And as you mentioned, I've worked at various levels in the EMS industry, both running the company, growing the company, and ultimately selling companies, or being acquired by one of the larger ones. And I guess I want to start first with a baseline. So everybody recognizes tier ones or EMS companies as tiers. Tier one, the billion-dollar folks, Flextronics, Foxconn, Jabil, and then the tier two and tier three, and there's kind of a nebulous dividing point revenue-wise with those, and then the tier fours and the mom and pops. And so I've consolidated that down to Craig's tiers. Not tiers because I've been in the contract manufacturing business, but tiers in terms of levels. And I'll call it the people in the trenches. They're the lowest tier. Those are the folks that are fighting it out in $20 million or less revenue factories that are beating their brains out trying to make a 5% margin, who probably have been around for a long time. They've fondly remember the good old days when customer loyalty was paramount and pricing was less of consideration than delivery and quality and longevity of relationship. They long for those days, which I think we all agree aren't coming back. They're hanging in there. They're very low overhead. They're not buying a lot of new equipment, but they're buying some stuff. But the things that are targeted to those people and the things that are on their horizon has to be very inexpensive, very easy to achieve, and not require a lot of technical complexity to integrate, because they don't have an IT staff. They don't have 3 SQL programmers. They have the owner who is probably doing much of that work. So I'm going to call those folks the folks in the trenches. And I've been in the trenches and haven't helped those people. It's a tough business, but they all have a set of loyal customers and they fill a role. You've got the middle tier, and those are the guys and gals who have made it out of that. They've made it out of the trenches. They've got some mass, and it could be a $50 million company or a $500 million company. Those folks have mass. They can think about Industry 4.0. They can do more than think about it. They can actually buy things to implement it, and they can have software people on board to do something with it. They can do something to get all this data. And so their view of the landscape is very different than the folks in the trenches. And then you have the folks at the top, the Jabils and the Flextronics, who they really drive a lot of this, and the rest of us in the trenches and in the middle, we're on the train that they're driving. They're laying the tracks. They're pushing the vendors for inter-machine communication. And so if I look at those tiers from that perspective, then I think that the evolution of the EMS business, you have to look at how it evolves within each of those areas. And as I've said publicly before, I've got very strong feelings on Industry 4.0, which is very valuable, and we want to collect data from all these machines. We want to provide data to the machines. Industry 5.0 might be when we get IBM Watson involved, and we interpret and make decisions based on the data. But the folks in the trenches, they're at industry 1.2. They're just trying to figure out how to stay alive, keep the overhead low, and ship good product. They're not going to invest a lot of money in $100,000 or $250,000 database systems to correlate all this data. So I think the evolution there is, what do they have to do to stay alive? Consolidate, become as efficient as possible. What can they do to collaborate with their peers, form industry groups that are regional based to try to keep themselves from racing to the bottom revenue-wise and just pricing something a little bit less expensive than the next guy or gal. The middle folks, those folks I think are going to be the engine for Industry 4.0, for instance. They're going to be the engine of giving data to customers quickly and giving them access, because they are able to move faster than the billion-dollar folks, but they have the resources to do something. And then the billion-dollar folks, I guess I'm not in that strata enough. I think that Gayle can probably speak to that better than I can, but I think I would bet they suffer many of the same considerations. They just have a heck of a lot more resources than those of us in the trenches do.
Okay, and I would like to mirror quite a lot of what Craig has actually said. And from my experience, I too am up at the tier 1 right down to the tier 4. So I'm able to take that kind of helicopter view of what the knock-on effect or what the ripple effect is. And it is absolutely influenced by what the tier 1 is doing. And my role varies. I can either go in and I can be a kind of end-to-end marketing consultant driving a very strategic view into how marketing enables sales, or I can go in on a project-by-project basis. But what we're seeing at that tier 1 level is there's a clear identification of where their sweet spot lies and where they are strong and where they're maybe involved in projects that they maybe shouldn't be involved in. And they're looking at the tier 2, they're looking at the tier 3, and they're looking at the tier 4 for collaborative models, as Craig suggests, and those partnerships so that they can focus on their core competence, because those tier 1 guys are now far, far greater and far more across the board than what they were when they were just EMS providers. They're looking at supply chain, they're looking at design, they're looking at logistics, and they're making acquisitions through vertical integration. So that build-to-print model that once was the core competence is now no longer all that drives those guys. So they're starting to look at, well, who could we partner with, who could we collaborate with down the tier structure that we can help them and we can enable them to grow, and they become a strategic partner. And also, in reflection of that, those people, tier 4, tier 3, tier 2, are looking up the way, thinking, over the past 10 years, we've all been swimming in one another's ponds. Business development has been very aggressive, and they've all swum in one another's ponds. So perhaps the tier 1 companies have picked up customers that just make no sense to them whatsoever. So if they could strategically go through their customer lists to build relationships with people further down the tier structure, then it benefits those guys. But if the tier 4, tier 3s and tier 2s could say, look, all I want is developmental, all I want is that low volume, high complex, high mix product that actually you've got customers, but it makes no sense for you to have those customers because the changeover is a complete pain to you. That's the customer I want. That's my sweet spot. So could I be the flight path or the control tower for the next generation and the next generation of that type of product? And when it goes to volume, when it goes to scale, can I bring that to you? Can we build a relationship model where we can still have visibility and it's still a customer we own, which removes that layer of paranoia, but we're not losing the next generation of product, which ultimately we probably would have because we can't scale.
So you're saying collaboration between the tiers is something that is a movement that we're moving towards ultimately. Is that driven by also changing habits of customers? So the product life cycle is a lot shorter, time to market is a lot shorter, time to profit has a whole different meaning nowadays than it did a couple of years ago. So businesses, EMS companies have to adapt both in the development, in the design stage, as well as the ramping up and then the end of life cycle as well. And neither can handle any of that in a complete sense? Is the collaborative approach being driven by those sort of developments?
Well, I think there's a demand and then there's a technology gap. So I think the customer is being driven with where they can get access to the technology that they need to enable their product development. Now, the tier one guys can go out and make that level of investment, but if we look at the technology to enable development like 3D printing, the price point has actually come down quite dramatically, that it's within reach of probably that tier 3, tier 2 level. So I think the need for speed is absolutely an enabler to make the customer look at who can service their market better. But then I think there's a regional approach as well. I think we're looking at the supply chain, and certainly the big tier one guys are looking at the supply chain, and they're looking at where they have got fragile spots along the supply chain, which might actually drive the need for them to build regional partnership agreements to try to ensure that they have as a robust supply chain as possible.
Yes, I was, several things as you were talking. If I were the component distributors, I'm not sure if I would love the tier ones or be scared to death of them. The Foxconn potential acquisition of the Toshiba memory unit, which looks like it's not going to happen. The broadening of the tier one base, which they're continuing to do. Those are becoming behemoth companies. Speaking at the trench level, to something that you spoke to, I think collaboration between Craig's three tiers is an absolute evolution that needs to happen. I think customers driving that is going to help significantly, because customers, I think, are more comfortable, and certainly I spend most of my time in Silicon Valley, where the pace of development is faster than breathless, just unbelievably breathless. And so those customers are comfortable with picking whatever pieces they need to accomplish their task. It doesn't have to be in one vendor. It doesn't have to be monolithic. They'll do whatever they have to do. But what is working against that is the paranoia that exists in certainly the trench level and the mid-tier level. And that paranoia is based on the following premise. When a billion-dollar company comes to a smaller company, and I've had this happen in the company I sold to Flextronics, and says, we're going to do better for you. We're going to help you more than you're going to help us. It's always the other way around, always the other way around. And so the paranoia is this middle tier, and the guys in the trenches and gals in the trenches, they are struggling to hold on to every customer. How is it going to help me to give you, Mr. Tier 2 or Tier 1, information about this customer that if I don't do that, I don't have any chance of loss unless they become so big that they would leave anyway, in which case I would lose them anyway. So I think the tier one, it's incumbent on the tier ones, when they say to a smaller supplier, we do want to collaborate, is that they really have to understand that person, that guy or gal's position, which is, my mortgage payment depends on this one customer. And if that one customer goes away, I am out of business. So picture Mr. CEO or Ms. CEO of Flextronics, where if you lose one customer, you are out of a job and don't have a mortgage, can't pay your mortgage. So I think the collaboration is one way it has to evolve. I think the customers would benefit from it and would help drive it. But internally to the CMs, to the EMS suppliers and the Craig's lowest and middle tier, the larger folks, the people collaborating have to figure out how to protect the people below them, really protect them. And if that can be broken through, then I think you're going to see a lot more collaboration.
And just to your point, Craig, I'm quite interested in the DNA of it as well. I'm quite interested in the psychology behind it. So from your experience as a consultant going into these organisations, do you think the new wave of management is opening the doors to these more grown-up conversations, essentially? Because that's what it is. It's a more grown-up conversation.
Well, yeah, and I'm never bashful from speaking my mind. Having gone from running EMS companies to now being, quote, a consultant, the age range of the owners or CEOs or presidents of most of the CMs that are under, say, $100, $150 million are in their 50s and 60s and plus. And they take a very parochial, very protective view of what they've built and what they're struggling to hold on to. And so it's a great consultant thing to say, let's have a smaller piece of a bigger pie. that just sounds like consultant speak for, I want your customers and you go retire and fade off into the sunset. So I think the smaller EMS companies, that the tier 3, tier 4s, or in my parlance, the folks in the trenches, they need to have an open mind and realize that there is strength in numbers. And I think if you look at Uber and the taxi cabs, the taxi industry reacted way too late and way too slow to a very rapid evolution, and now they're fighting for their lives. And so I think we're on the cusp of that. Yeah. And so I think these 50, 60-year-old guys and gals with white hair need to realize that if they're going to evolve, they're going to have to open their minds to these conversations. Yeah. And the bigger folks that are engaging in those conversations need to bend over backwards to rest assured that when the conversation is done, they're still going to be able to make their mortgage payment.
Yeah, and I think, you spoke about what's the enablers behind this, why is this happening? Well, from a marketing perspective, we talk to the OEMs, look at the Uber model, look at the Airbnb model, look at all these companies that if they didn't adapt, they were going to die. Look at transformation. So that's the marketing buzzwords that we use in our industry. Well, actually, I think the EMS companies have had to think, how does that relate to us? Because we're giving that advice to our customers, our OEM customers, but we need to take that advice in-house. It's exactly the same as Industry 4.0. We're talking to our customers, we're talking to the OEM about the benefits of a smart factory and the benefits of machine interaction and smart, automated Industry 4.0, but let's look at our own facilities. How smart are our own facilities? And from a marketing perspective, if we're going to promote that message, we need to be able to look at it in-house as well.
Yeah, I was approached by, I'm going to credit him for this, and I hope I'm not doing it incorrectly, but I believe it was Mike Buteau from Circuits Assembly. We were talking at one trade show, and he said, why, look at all this unused line time. There's something on the order of 300-ish CMs under $25 million in the US. I know for a fact there are over 100 in Silicon Valley, and those lines are not busy all the time. Well, that seems to scream for an Uber model. Some little app where you say, here's my bill of materials, which of course never comes without errors, but in a perfect world, the data is perfect. Here's my data. I just want to run this product on your vacant line over there, because if some money is better than no money, and that would be great for the consumers. And I think if you look at the Uber model, there's two camps of thought there. One is it's great for Uber, but the drivers, not so much. They're not making as much money as the taxi folks were. So the whole idea of consolidation and openness of the folks at those tiers interacting with each other, they're just going to have to bite the bullet and do more of it. But I just want to keep pushing. We've got to get the folks at the top to enable the conversation, and then vendors. There's machines that I can see just with my eye here on the stage, $100,000, $250,000, $50,000. Where's the middle market tools that are $1,000 for the tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers who can't afford to have a SQL development team and can't afford to buy Oracle and then implement it? Where's the middleware tools for them to get on board the Industry 4.0 train? That's two tough things.
Okay, so it's still a couple of issues to solve, but I think collaboration, just as Industry 4.0 suggests, we are going towards a collaborative world. The younger generations that are coming in and replacing even the smaller tiers, the trenches, as you say, I think will drive the collaborative approach, because that's what the younger generations are growing up with. We've run out of time. I would love to go on speaking because this is really interesting, and anybody that wants to know more about your views can of course contact you. Thank you once again for your participation.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you all.
My pleasure.
To the
Thanks.
audience. Thank you.